So I am back to review Flowers in the Attic, The Origin, Part 2. Let me just say, first, I only thought there were two parts to this. Come to find out that there are four parts, which I'm really happy about because I don't see how they could have told all of this story, have done this story justice in only doing it in two parts. So I'm happy to learn that there are four, and we are really seeing how it fleshes out this really well because this story spans many years, many decades, and in order to tell it right, you have to spend the time. And so I'm glad that Lifetime actually did that. So in the last video, I talked a little bit about how it was different from the book, The Garden of Shadows. And I'm realizing now that they are taking a complete turn here and they're doing things pretty different, especially as it relates to the children, Mal, Joel, and Corinne. But I like it. I think that it makes it much more interesting. It fleshes out the character of the children much better because in a book, it was a little flat. You know, you were really getting it from the perspective of Malcolm and Olivia, but now we get a glimpse inside of the children's heads and we get to see the dynamics between the children and their parents. And one thing that really stood out to me, and this was kind of apparent in the book too, is just how good of a mother Olivia was. I mean, we know she was a very cold-hardened person because of her circumstances, but really watching her interaction with her kids, the one-on-one with each of them, like she had a special relationship with each child, was really humanizing, you know, and it gives us a different perspective of her, and it definitely makes you sympathize more toward her because you see that even though she was a victim of all of Malcolm's stuff, she still found it in her to connect with her children, to have a good relationship with them, and to try her best to protect them, even though that didn't really work out well in the end. In any case, just going to review this episode, or this part two, I should say. And I think that it was kind of broken up into two sections. That's how I looked at it. The first piece was really about Alicia and the pregnancy with Corinne and how that all came to be. And the second piece is after a time jump. It jumps about 15 years later when we see that the children are older, and that's when it goes into their relationship with Malcolm and all the things that transpire from that point. So let's begin at the beginning. So we see in the beginning that, you know, we start off, obviously, Alicia is pregnant. Olivia has made the decision to pretend that she is pregnant so that they could take this child and raise it as if it's their own. Mrs. Steiner is suspicious. You know, we also learned last week that, you know, she's not a fan of Olivia. And it would only make sense that, you know, she is kind of watching this closely and just looking to see what's going on with the situation because it doesn't smell right. And she's not a fan of Olivia's. So, but Olivia does the smart thing. She gets rid of her pretty early in the game. Once she overhears Mrs. Steiner speaking to Nella about all the noises that she's hearing in the East Wing, she dismisses her. Obviously, Mrs. Steiner is not happy about this because she's been employed by the Foxworths for, it seems like, well, she's lived at Foxworth Hall, she says, for her entire life. We know that her mother worked there previous, but you know, she doesn't take it well. And, you know, there is some foreshadowing there. We get the sense that this is not going to be the last that we hear from Mrs. Steiner and that she might come back to try to take some type of revenge on Olivia. But for the time being, she is gone. Olivia dismisses her, takes all her keys, and then she promotes Nella and she promotes her to be the head housekeeper. We know that Nella and Olivia have developed this relationship, and then there's going to be a fracture later once Nella discovers everything that's going on with Alicia. So before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about what's going on with Olivia. You know, and I alluded to this in the last video, and she alludes to it when she says something about control. And I think for her, she has felt all these years she's been married to Malcolm that she has lost control of her life. And she has in a lot of ways. You know, she does not have her own money. We know that her father lost the money in the last one. she has nowhere else to go. She's a woman in the early 1900s. She has very limited rights, and she's just kind of stuck here. And so she's trying to make the best of it. And that's where her relationship with her kids comes into play, because she just devotes her life to them because she really has nothing else. I mean, she's in a loveless marriage with a madman, right? So this whole thing with Alicia, I think, is, there's the piece about protecting the Foxworth name. She keeps saying that, and she keeps using that as an excuse for Olivia. That's why, sorry, for Alicia. And that's why Alicia should continue to go through with this, because, you got to protect the Foxworth name so that she can have her money, and again, of course, scandal is not a good thing. Scandal in the early 1900s is definitely not a good thing. But he's an extremely wealthy man. Um, I don't know that this scandal, so to speak, would have rocked their world in any significant way. I mean, it wasn't going to affect their finances. It's not like Olivia was, in the social circuit, or, they had any like political aspirations or anything. I mean, if this came out, of course, it would not look good for them. But to do all of this to protect the name is a little bit of a stretch, because you have to wonder what would have really been the consequences or the outcome if it came out, or if Alicia just left, even if there was some kind of gossip about who she was pregnant from and all this other stuff. I mean, there's a lot of different ways they could have done this to without having to imprison Alicia. But I believe that this has to do with control for Olivia. She even says so much. This is her way of controlling the scenario, of, keeping Malcolm under her thumb as much as she can, about making the rules for once. And while she kind of does this, she doesn't. Malcolm reminds her that, she's really in control of nothing, and that he really does have the final say. She tells Malcolm to stay away from Alicia. She says that she has the only key to the attic, but it's not far-fetched that he would have had a key. But we learn that there's another way to the attic, right? There's another entrance from the library that used to be a servant's entrance years ago. So we see that Malcolm is still going and raping Alicia at night. When Olivia learns this, she cuts off Alicia's hair, under the premise that Malcolm is attracted to beautiful things, and if we make you less beautiful, then he won't be attracted to you. How true that is, we don't know. I mean, I imagine that Alicia's beauty and his interest in her is larger than her hair, but this is what Alicia says. This also follows in the book that that's what Olivia did. She also did it to Kathy in Flowers in the Attic, so this seems to be a reoccurring theme here. Obviously, Alicia's not happy about it, but she goes along with it. To send Malcolm a message, Olivia takes Alicia's hair and she leaves it on his desk, sending him a message. They have a confrontation, and Malcolm basically tells her, I'll play along with you, but like, don't push this, right? Don't do no antics like this again, because I will have the final word. And, later on, we realize that he has gone so far as to draft a letter to a psych ward threatening to have her institutionalized. And he says that, he reads her portions of the letter basically saying that, my wife is delusional. She's going so far as to pretend that she's pregnant. She might need some time away. And that, and at that time, a husband could have his wife put away. So Olivia knows this is a real thing. And she then, I guess, reassesses and realizes that, Malcolm is not to be played with. And as much as she thought she had power and control in the situation, she really doesn't. This one scene, which I thought was pretty powerful, is when he threatens her, and he takes a knife or a letter opener off of his desk, and he stabs her fake belly, and he kind of holds her by her throat and threatens her. And you see the fear. You see that, and I don't know that Malcolm has ever put his hands on her, and I doubt that he ever would, but he is letting her know in no uncertain terms that this is his show. And that was a strong message to Olivia. He had also let her know too that if this doesn't pan out, if for some reason Alicia, you know, doesn't go through with this, if something happens to the baby, anything, any of this goes wrong, and he doesn't get what he wants out of this, which is a daughter, it's going to be on Olivia. You know, Alicia will suffer, obviously, but Olivia is definitely going to suffer. And so I thought that this was an interesting thing that they added because it creates a motivation for Olivia to stay the course with this. Because we see that she's a decent person, she's a good person. You know, she has her personal demons, but she doesn't mean harm to anybody. And it would seem that what kind of person could lock somebody in, lock somebody up, you know, away in the attic, so to speak. But she has a lot of motivation here. I mean, not only does she want the baby because she wants a daughter and, you know, all of this stuff, but she is she's afraid of Malcolm. And she knows that this will not bode well at all. So she has to do everything in her power to make sure that this moves smoothly. We also see that Christopher, Alicia and Garland's son, who at this stage is probably about 2, 3 years old, he's at the house. And the story that they had told all the staff was that Alicia was going to go to Pittsburgh and like kind of set up shop and get her life together. And while she's doing that, Christopher would stay with them. And of course, they snuck Alicia back in the house and put her in the attic. But so Christopher is there, and Olivia becomes a mother figure to him. You know, Olivia has her 2 other boys, and you know she's like pretty much raising them together. You know, Christopher has lost his father, his mother is missing. He's too young to understand anything, and he clings to Olivia, which makes sense. You know, we see him sleeping with her at night. There's a scene where all of the kids are playing, and Christopher asks Olivia if he can call her mommy. And, you know, Olivia she's a good person. She's a mother. You know, she has maternal instincts. You know, she cares about Christopher. So there is a bond between the two of them. Alicia is clearly going through it because she is being locked away. You know, she's still in mourning for her husband. We see a scene where she's looking out of the window and she sees Christopher and the other Mal and Joel and Olivia playing, and she sees the connection between her son and Olivia, and it's really hurting. It's really hurting because now, you know, think about it. This woman is sitting in this room for hours on end, day after day. Obviously, after a while, her mind is going to start to race, and she is, you know, thinking. She starts banging on the window, trying to get her son's attention because she hasn't seen him in months, however long she's been locked up, and she's drawing attention to herself. Olivia runs up to the room and tells her, you know, you need to stop. You're blowing our cover. We have to make this work. And again, remember, Olivia definitely has motivation because she has been threatened by Malcolm. So this has to work, and she cannot allow Alicia to ruin it. She tries all of the old tricks. You know, we have to protect the name. You need your money, blah, blah, blah. How are you going to survive out there? You know, you don't have any skills. How are you going to support yourself? And Alicia's over it. You know, she's like, I don't care at this point. I just want to get my son and I want to leave and I will figure this out later. And it becomes, you know, they have a tussle of some sorts. She knocks Olivia over and she runs out the room. Olivia is running after her. She's now sprained her ankle, and so she's limping. She calls Malcolm. Malcolm comes out. He runs to grab Alicia. They tussle, and Alicia falls down the stairs. And again, she's pregnant, so, you know, there's all this concern. Is she alive? Is the baby okay? You know, you see that she's bleeding, and Malcolm is, again, blaming this on Olivia and putting it on her to fix this. You know, reminding her constantly, if something goes wrong here, you're going to pay the price. Olivia's thinking quickly, so she calls the doctor and, you know, she's asking him for his discretion. They bring the doctor up to the room where they have placed Alicia, and they tell the doctor that, you know, in her grief, she turned to a servant and she got pregnant, and they're trying to keep this on the low because of obvious reasons. They give him some money and thank him for his discretion. So, you know, the doctor buys it. You know, he's been paid off, and Alicia wakes up during this moment and she tells the doctor what happened, that Malcolm has raped her and that they've locked her away, and they try to dismiss it as if it's the babblings of a crazy woman, and the doctor gives her a sedative. So and then she pretty much goes back into captivity. We also see at this time that now that Olivia has sprained her ankle, it's going to be harder for her to take care of Alicia because she's the only one who knows. She's the one who's been going up and down the stairs every day and taking care of her and bringing her meals. So she has to enlist Nella at this point. And again, she and Nella have had a really good relationship up to this point. They bonded, you know. She seems to be Olivia's only friend. But when she tells Nella is beside herself because, you know, she can't grasp that they actually have done this to this woman. Not only just because of, you know, the gravity of this and how horrible it is, but we also know that Nella has some stuff in her past that has to do with the Foxworth. So all of this is just, you know, it's just too much, you know, and she lets Olivia know that this is crazy. She doesn't want to be a part of it, but she agrees to do it. She agrees to help. And we see a scene in which she's actually bringing Alicia her food. They have a conversation in which Nella confesses to her that Malcolm had raped her at some point in the past. She became pregnant, and her daughter Celia, which we saw in the last episode, is his daughter. You know, we kind of knew that, right? But this time she actually confirms it, and she confirms it and tells her that, you know, this is what happened. She hates Malcolm, but, you know, he is paying for her daughter's education, and she's just kind of sucking it up, you know, looking at the bigger picture and just keeping her head down and doing her work. You know, Alicia's like, how could you, you know, work for these people? Look at what they've done to you. And, you know, Nella, again, she's looking at the world through a different lens. You know, she's a Black woman in the early 1900s. She has, I mean, if you think Olivia has no rights and no agency, Nella definitely doesn't. It's probably a good job, considering what her alternatives were. She might be getting paid a little extra because of what happened. Obviously, he's paying for her daughter to go to school. So she's dealing with it. You know, she's making the best out of it. She's looking at the bigger picture, and she tells Alicia that she has to do the same thing. She's like, you know, do what they want, get your money, and leave this house and pretend like it never happened. So it seems like that pep talk is what keeps Alicia, has Alicia stay the course. You know, she stays until she goes through with this. We see a scene later in which, you know, she goes into labor and she is, you know, having pains and labor pains and she's screaming. Olivia goes into her room and mimics the same thing because, again, everybody's supposed to believe that Olivia is pregnant, and Corinne is born. So when the little girl is born, you know, Malcolm gets his way. It's a daughter, and he decides to name her after his late mother. And this is obviously a red flag because Malcolm has this love-hate relationship with his mother, which lent to his hate for women. You know, he seems to only use women for sexual needs. He married Olivia because he wanted to have kids and he wanted somebody to run his household. And he clearly has some type of there's some type of hate there. And in naming his daughter Corinne, this is his way of reliving his mother through her. You know, it's almost like just recreating this and kind of molding it the way he wants it to be, because he loved his mother. He hated her because she abandoned him, but obviously he loves her. He's still he paying for that affection and the love, the relationship with his mother. But she left. So he has this weird thing going on in his head where is if he names his daughter Corinne, it is like his mother is reborn in his daughter. He can now rewrite history, but he also is reminded of what his mother did by naming his daughter Corinne. So it's just a weird, dysfunctional thought process that's going on here. But he got his way. Alicia leaves with Christopher, and it appears that all is well. So now we move to the pretty much the second part of part two, which does a time jump. We fast forward from Corinne's first birthday to her 16th birthday. So we're 15 years further out, and it's her birthday. They're throwing her a party. We see that, Mal is a grown man, Joel is a grown man, Mal is engaged. And it's evident early on, that Corinne is Malcolm's favorite. Even when his boys were young, he was never invested, especially when it came to Joel, because he was disappointed that Joel wasn't a girl. And we'll see just how bad his relationship is with his children later on. But Corinne is his world. She is the apple of his eye. We see the way he watches her. She's a beautiful young woman. It's her birthday. She's dancing with a young man, and you could see like Malcolm not liking this, and he goes and he interrupts and he dances with her. And later on, his gift to her is a doll. She's 16, so obviously she's too old for this, but this just speaks to how he still sees her and how he wants to keep her a little girl. And it's obvious to everybody that she is the favorite. His two sons, who have turned out to be handsome, successful, well-rounded young men, but their father largely ignores them. And I believe it's probably extra painful to see the way he treats Corinne, because I guess it shows that he has it in him to be a good father or to be a doting father. He just doesn't want to do it with his sons. So they're dealing with that, but the good thing is that they have each other, and they have Olivia, and she pours love into them. And, so it's as good as it's going to be, even if they have a strained relationship with their father. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the storylines of each child, and how they all kind of intertwine at the very end. So Mal is the oldest. He remember, Olivia had set up trust for the boys so that when they turned 25, they would get their inheritance, so that they wouldn't be under their father's thumb. So at this point, Mal is probably, 22, 23. He's engaged, and he wants his money. He's engaged to a young woman who I think, either, comes from a good family, maybe has dated other men of means, and he feels the need to impress her, to take care of her, and he feels like he needs his inheritance to do this. He asks his father to release the funds early, and of course Malcolm says no. And not only does he say no, but he's very insulting to him. Malcolm pretty much, pleads, can I just have my money? Like, what difference does a couple years make? And Malcolm's like, I hate a beggar, and this is pathetic, and he's just so insulting to him. And it's just sad, because you don't understand, why does Malcolm hate his son so much? Like, there really just makes no sense. And I'm not saying it makes sense that he hates Joel, but if you understand that he was disappointed that Joel wasn't a girl, not good, not okay. But Mal is his firstborn son. He's, he checks all the boxes. Why do you hate him? Like, it's just, it just speaks to Malcolm's dysfunction, and to the evil that he is, because there's just no reason to treat his sons like this, but, he does. And, it's nothing for him to release the money early. He's just simply doing it just not to do it, just to be cruel, At one point later, it becomes clear or obvious to all of the children that Malcolm is Celia. Celia is Nella's daughter, Nella the housekeeper. It becomes evident that, Malcolm is Celia's father. And when Mal Jr., I guess, confirms this information, he uses that to blackmail his father, or at least he thought he could blackmail his father. But his father, Malcolm, doesn't care. He's like, tell your mother, like, I don't care. And then he even confirms it for Olivia. Like, yep, I'm her father, what? And, Mal Jr. is just, he's dejected because, number one, it didn't work. And number two, just to see his mother treated that way. Just to see the cavalier disrespect that Malcolm has for Olivia. And we see a conversation between Mal and Olivia where he says, what are you going to do? Like, all the kids are almost out of the house. You really don't have a loving relationship with this man. Like, what's the next chapter of your life going to look like? He's concerned for his mother, because he sees what a monster his father is. And, Olivia's like, don't worry about me. Just, once you get married, move as far away from here as you can. She is willing to fall on the sword for her children. But I thought it was very endearing to see how concerned they were for her, that they weren't just oblivious to what was going on around them, that they truly care for her well-being, knowing what type of marriage she's in. We also see a conversation later between her and Corinne, same type of thing, where Corinne is saying, you and daddy are not intimate, there's no affection, like, don't you want love, don't you want these things? And again, Olivia is like, just worry about yourself, I want you to be happy, I want you to have all these things in the world that I never did, just kind of you know solidifying how good of a mother and how good and loving of a mother she actually is. But anywho, so that's Mal's relationship with his father. And then we have Joel, who is probably about 20, and and this is where the story definitely takes a turn from the book, is we learn that Joel is either a homosexual, or he is bisexual, or he's curious, because we see he's exchanging eyes with a young man, and I can't remember the guy's name right now. It's Celia's stepson, a young black man who fixes cars. And Joel makes eyes with him, and we see there's some kind of connection there. Later, Joel brings his car to this young man's shop to get repaired. And while they're there, they're talking, they're bonding over music. We know that Joel is a musician. And, there's some energy there. And obviously, they can't explore it for a myriad of reasons. But there's something in the air, and it's mutual. Okay. So we know that this later on is not going to bode well. This storyline is going to play out, I'm imagining, in episodes, in parts 3 and 4. But there's no way in the world that any of this is going to go well. And it's probably going to be how this depiction of the book is going to lead to Joel's demise. So let's talk a little bit about Corinne, because Corinne is kind of the core of this story. She's the apple of her father's eye, but he is obsessed with her. He doesn't want to see her grow up. She's a normal 16-year-old girl. There's a young man in the neighborhood that she is interested in. And, we see her sneaking off to go spend time with him. Her brothers help her. I love that Corinne and her brothers, and this is also true to the book, have a really good relationship, all three of them. And even though Malcolm treats the boys horribly and he gives so much love and attention to Corinne, her brothers are not jealous or envious of her. At least not, they might be envious, but they don't take it out on her. They love their sister, and the three of them have a great relationship. We see scenes where the three of them are sitting out, like, by the lake, and they're smoking some weed or something, and they have a really good bond, which is nice to see. But back to Olivia and her father. So once Malcolm sees that, I'm sorry, not Olivia. Back to Corinne and her father. So we see Malcolm blocking, right? So when she goes out on a date with that some young man, one of her young peers, Malcolm shuts it down. He's upset that she's riding this motorcycle. He tells her that she can't see this young man anymore because all men want is sex. And, he's trying to insulate her, which a lot of parents will do. But, again, Malcolm is very over the top and very demanding. And he doesn't allow her. There's a dance that she wants to go to, and he tells her she can't go. And Olivia comes to her later and tries to soothe her. She's like, I recognize your father is overbearing and overprotective, and he just loves you and blah, blah, blah. She's like, but I think you should go to this party. She wants her daughter to live a full life and enjoy herself. And she's also, mildly aware that this Malcolm's infatuation with Corinne is unnatural. There's a scene where she notices Malcolm peering through a crack in Corinne's door. She sees the way that Malcolm looks at her. She has all this, she knows what he did to Alicia, obviously. She knows that he's just not a good man. So she's keeping her eye on this, and she knows that she needs to protect Corinne. So she tells Corinne she can go to the party. She even goes as far as she drives her to the party. Corinne went too far with this young man. She comes and she tells her mother later that she's pregnant. Again, this is different from the book. This did not happen, but they are fleshing this out in a really interesting way and just kind of really giving depth to all of these characters. You know, when she tells Olivia, Olivia has a pretty calm reaction. You know, she tells Corinne that she's not mad at her. She makes sure that Corinne knows that we're going to fix this together. This is our problem. She takes Corinne to get an abortion um, at a brothel. We saw last episode, I think, where she followed Malcolm to a brothel, and there's a woman, Miss Hazel, who does abortions, and so she takes Corinne there. Corinne gets the procedure done, and they just try to, you know, sweep this under the rug. She tells Corinne, like, let's just act like this never happened. You know, you have a new leash on life. Let's just move forward. Malcolm had followed them, however, so he knows that something is up. And he confronts them at dinner. They try to lie, but you know, he roars and tells them, accuses Olivia of being a whore and a horrible mother and all these things, and just tells them, like, I told you that this was going to happen. I told you how boys were. Look what happened, and you're going to ruin our daughter. And he has he blows up. It's a huge explosion at the dining room table, and he grounds Corinne, tells her she can't go anywhere. She's to stay in the house, and that she is pretty much on lockdown. And there's nothing to get around this. You know, Malcolm, he gives a little bit of rope every now and then, I guess, when he's feeling generous. But once he puts his foot down, it's down and it's a wrap. And so Corinne is pretty much under house arrest, given what happened. This incident is what starts Olivia really thinking about protecting Corinne from him. There is a poison garden in the back of Foxworth Hall. Again, this is another thing that was not in the book, where there's all of these fruits and berries and stuff that are growing that are poisonous. Olivia learns about this. She does a little bit of research, and she learns that, you know, what these actually are. There's a scene when they're all at dinner. So it's Malcolm, his fiance, Joel, Corinne, Olivia, and Malcolm Sr. And Malcolm starts to choke. He passes out. They bring the doctor. Come to find out that he'd been poisoned, or the doctor suspects that he'd been poisoned. So we're thinking that Olivia has done this because she's kind of alluded to the fact that she would need to do something drastic in order to protect all of them from Malcolm. But come to find out, it was actually Corinne who did it. Apparently she learned, either she was watching her mother or whatever, and she, you know, found out about these poisonous berries and fruits, and she took some of it and she put it into her father's food, which was very shocking to me because, I mean, that's extreme. She says to her mother later that she didn't try to kill him. She just wanted to make him a little sick so that she could get out the house. And I don't know if this speaks to Corinne's naivete, her ignorance, or it's foreshadowing of the type of things that Corinne would do in the future. We know later in Flowers in the Attic that she is willing to poison her children so that she can get rid of them. So I'm not sure what was going on in her head when she did this, but I mean, poison your father just so you can get out the house? Like, Olivia had a reason to poison him, you know, given everything he put her through, and she's seeing him in totality for the monster he is. But, you know, Corinne was just going through typical teenage stuff with her father. To go so far was just really shocking to me. And maybe she just really was naive enough to think, I'll just put a little bit in there and it'll make him sick. But once Malcolm learns that he's been poisoned, he's thinking that Mal did it because he knows that Mal is upset with him because he will not give him his trust early. And Olivia goes into defense mode. You know, she wants to defend her children. And she says, well, what if it was me? You know, putting it out there and trying to kind of just deflect so that he doesn't think that Mal did this. But Malcolm believes this. So we are at the point where Mal and his wife are about to get married. And in order to get revenge, Malcolm goes to Mal's fiance and he tells her, that he is basically running things in their household. What he says is law. Everything has to go through him. And he says he recognizes that Mal wants his money early, and the fiance who seems not to care about the money. I mean, I think a lot of this is in Mal's head. I think he's competing with her ex-boyfriends or with other men, or he's feeling insecure. So he's thinking he needs this money, but I don't think that his wife even cares. But Malcolm uses this, and he pushes himself on her in a weird way. He makes it clear to her, like, if you want Mal to have his money, or if you want Mal to be happy, you have to give me what I want. And she gets the memo, and she kisses him. Mal walks in while they're kissing, and obviously his reaction is understandable. He runs off. He goes to find his sister. She's not in her room. He sees what he believes is the weed that they had been smoking together previously. He grabs it. He gets in his car. He speeds off, and he's smoking. He sees Corinne. She jumps in the car, and he's starting to tell her what happened. But what he's actually smoking is the poison that Corinne had used to poison her father. We don't know how much of it he used, but clearly it's enough to kill him. And he has an attack. He starts coughing while he's driving, and he slams into a tree, and he dies. Similar to the book, I mean, the poison and the smoking wasn't the cause, but he did have a motorcycle accident in the book, and that is how he died. So obviously everybody is distraught. His fiance, his brother, his sister, his father, and Olivia is absolutely devastated. Her firstborn son, she's beside herself, and she blames herself. When she learns that he had ingested the poison, she believes this is all her fault because she brought the poison into the fold. Had she not discovered it and not, retrieved it from the garden, Corinne would not have been aware of it. She would not have had it in her room. Mal would not have thought that it was the weed, and he would not have smoked it, and all of this would not have happened. So she is taking all the blame for this. And it's no help that Malcolm is blaming her for this. He would have blamed her probably anyway, but he's putting all of this on her. And Olivia's a broken woman. We really see that she is she's distraught. She's lost her son. She blames herself. She feels like she was so focused on protecting Corinne that she did not protect her other children. So at the end of this, she has pretty much conceded, and Malcolm has told her, you're under my thumb now. I tried to give you a little freedom, a little room, but look what has happened, and I'm taking control now. I'm handling everything, and you're just going to sit here, and you are going to and you need to concede all control to me. And she agrees. One thing of note that I forgot to mention is at one point after Olivia learns that Celia is Malcolm's daughter, she talks to Nella, and they hadn't spoken obviously they'd spoken, but their relationship had been fractured since Corinne had been born. We saw once after Nella had agreed to help her with the situation with Alicia, we see a scene in which Olivia thanks her and tells her, I really appreciate you, and you're a friend, and, all these other things. And Nella's like, we're not friends. You don't know anything about me. You don't know my last name. You know nothing about me. And if you really knew me, you never would have asked me to help you with this. And Olivia at this point was confused because she did not know at that point what had happened between Malcolm and Nella. And she truly believed that she and Nella were friends. But Nella let her know in no uncertain terms, like, I work for you. And that's the end of that. And as much as I may have thought you were a good woman, and I may have believed that we could be friends, seeing that situation with Alicia put her in a different light in Nella's eyes. It brought back a lot of trauma for her, given everything that happened between her and Malcolm, her having to be quiet about how he abused her, and seeing it all, history repeat itself. So she was disgusted with Olivia, and she told her, we're not friends, and she pretty much cut her off. And we get the impression that during those 15 years, it was just business between the two of them. So After Olivia learns the truth, she goes to Nella. She tells her what she learned. She apologizes to her for what happened. And she had no. I mean, Olivia didn't know. She really did not know what the situation was. So we see that they reconcile, and that was a really good moment because obviously Olivia needs friends. She needs a support system, and Nella is probably the ideal person given she knows all of the dynamics of the household and who all the players are. So she could be a support and a friend for Olivia. Olivia also asks to go and meet Celia. She wants to meet the daughter of her husband, and she does, and they have a moment. I think it's interesting too. There's a couple of times where we see Celia next with Joel. We see her at Corinne's birthday party. And that's their siblings, right? That's the crazy thing about all of this is obviously at that time, Malcolm could not have admitted it. That happened a lot in those instances where men father children, and then they may take care of them silently, but they would never acknowledge them, and they would definitely never let their children know that they had a sibling. But to just see that these are brother and sister just kind of crossing paths over and over again, and they don't know it, or at least Celia knows it, but knows that there could be nothing of it, and to see Celia living in poverty, as most Black people did at that time. Meanwhile, her father is this multimillionaire, and her mother works for him. It was just one of those moments where, while that's not really the storyline, it kind of forces you to pause and just think about the dynamics of all these people and how this is playing out in real time, and when the thoughts that they must have been going through their mind at the time. But anywho, so this part ends with, Mal's death, the funeral, Olivia's devastation, and we see that Alicia has come back. So we see a scene where she's ringing the doorbell. Those of you who've read the books know that she has come. Well, actually, in the book, they learn that she died via telegram, or that she's dying, and she asks Olivia and Malcolm to take Christopher in because she has died broke, and they do. But in the limited series, she actually returns to the house in person. And so, I'm interested to see what that's going to look like, what's going to be the plot line, how they're going to reintroduce her and Christopher, her son, who will go on to have a relationship with Corinne, which will set the tone for the Flowers in the Attic series. But again, great episode. I think I like this better than the last one, just because it was so much more in depth and it was so much more character development. And acting was good. It was a good dramatic story. I mean, even if you don't follow the books, I think if you watch this, it would be enough to keep you drawn in and to come back and watch parts 3 and 4. But I really enjoyed it, and I am so happy that there are more, because, like, again, I thought they were going to put it all into 2 parts, which would have really been unreasonable, and it just wouldn't have really played out well. But let me know what you thought, and what do you think about all of the changes they made? Should they have followed the book a little bit more closely? What do you think about Olivia, her relationship with her children, and what they're going to do next week in part 3 with Alicia and Christopher and all that good stuff? But thank you for watching, and and please like this video, share this video with your other VC Andrews fans. Subscribe to my channel so that when I post my review for the next one, you can get a notification. And I guess we will talk next week after part 3. Thanks. Bye.